Hello and welcome to another episode of Steelfur Speaks. I am, as always, your host, Finbar, aka Steelfur. This week, we are here to talk about the official Blitz update, 16th of August, very timely news, and talking about the implications of those changes and why it's a really, really good direction for the game, and why I'm really happy that the designers are being reactive, listening to the community, consulting the community, but still kind of making their own logic in their decisions. Stay tuned. Before we dive into the full episode, I just wanted to talk briefly about this channel and, the things that are going on in the background. Steelfur Speaks 2.0 is fully underway. I'm in discussion with a few people who've reached out to me who might want to come onto the channel and be sort of regular guests. Scheduling, as always, is one of the problems with these kind of things, but I am undeterred and pushing ahead. In terms of other things that are going on in the background, I am still writing. I have not stopped, but obviously bigger projects mean that I need to donate more of my time to them, and less time to, finishing things like that on a rapid schedule. So I'm just going to let it simmer away. I have 6 chapters out of 21 done. I've got another 15 chapters to write. I'm going to get it done some point in the next year. I don't need to rush it and get it out the door faster. But if it happens, it happens. With these things, if I get a good week, I could easily knock out a couple of chapters in that week. But if I don't have it, then I don't. I'm also working on a bigger video project, the first part of which should be revealed later on this week. It's really exciting. I think it's going to be really useful for a lot of new players getting into the game, and I'm really excited to be working on it, so stay tuned for that. If you like my content, please do like and subscribe to the channel. As always, with YouTube, about 50% of the people who watch my videos on average are not subscribed. And you know what? I think I do a decent amount of work on videos, and I think you should subscribe to the channel. Let's just put it that way. I am still, in my opinion, one of the best flesh and blood commentators in terms of critically analyzing the game, not just, doing fluff pieces or talking about how great the game is. And I really think if you agree with me on that, then you should subscribe to my channel and give me that recognition for the work that I've been doing. That is it. That note from our sponsor, which is, as always, myself, though I would be happy to have another sponsor if someone wanted to get involved with the channel in a more substantive way. Let's get into the official Blitz update. This article, I love it. It gets straight to the point. 3 major changes to the Blitz format as of today, Wednesday, the 16th of August. The basic rundown: players will submit a deck list that includes 1 young hero and up to 52 cards. These 52 cards can contain a mix of cards that go in your main deck, or cards that you can equip, or that exist in your inventory and arena, that are called arena cards. We've seen that change to terminology from inventory to arena, which allows them to put a lot of stuff into that arena area that previously couldn't be in there. So before this, you had your inventory in Blitz, which was 11 cards. Or was it 12 cards? I think it was 11 cards, and you could have your 40 card deck and 11 pieces of equipment in your inventory, and you could choose what equipment went to your deck, but your main deck was static every time. Same 40 cards every single time. With Skirmish Season 7, a move which I 100% supported because it was playtesting a big decision with the public, testing public sentiment before they moved into making it, we had the introduction of these flex rules, which said that those slots now that they were giving you aside from your deck could all be equipment if you wanted to have a full suit of armor, but you could also include other cards. So if your hero was really good with 4 set pieces of armor, like say, Wizard, who has their Null Rune baked into their armor slots, you could actually run a lot more cards in your sideboard and change your deck for each matchup. Most heroes, from my own experience, were changing 3 to 4 cards. They had roughly 8 pieces of equipment in their sideboard, 4 main pieces of equipment, and then some Arcane Barrier, usually a few flex bits and slots there. And then you had 4 cards that could go into the deck, switching out. In my case, I was playing Briar, so I started running Poison the Well as an instant to deal with Fatigue Iridex. And I also put in Burdens of the Past for the same reason, because I wanted to set up a big Channel Mount Heroic turn mid-game, in Blitz. If that mid-game happens, sometimes you just draw it at the right time. And then I could play my Channel Mount Heroic, and I could say, well, you've already played 1 Sink Below, 1 Fate Foreseen, and 1 Flick Flack, and I know you're running a lot more Flick Flacks. cool, you can't play any defense reactions this turn, and here's my big channel mount heroic turn, and hopefully they would have a few defense reactions in their deck. And that was my plan for fatigue strategies. And then during the entire skirmish season, I did not play against a single fatigue deck. However, I did successfully use Poison the Well to kill a Bravo, which felt really, really, really good, because it was in the first skirmish before everyone had realized how cracked Poison the Well was against certain strategies. Remember, Poison the Well says the next time a hero would gain life, they lose that life instead. So if someone plays Sigil of Solace and you react at instant speed with Poison the Well, they lose 3 life instead of gaining, which is exactly what I did to my Bravo opponent, which felt really, really good as a counter tech card. And obviously, if you're playing it, you're costing someone 1/6 to 7th of their life total in Blitz, which is fantastic. So that change then means that the next change happens. At the start of the game, players reveal their heroes simultaneously, decide who's going first, and then each player presents to their opponent a shuffled main deck of exactly 40 cards, plus any weapons or equipment. Any non-presented cards stay in your deck. So a big thing that happened in Skirmish Season 7 was that you were actually allowed to run more than 40 cards in your deck. So you could actually just add those extra cards, which is what led to, say, an Ira deck with 4 pieces of equipment running at 8 additional cards and pursuing fatigue strategies using that. I personally, and I know watching Twitter, felt that a lot of, that extra cards made the matchups. I didn't like how it increased the viability of fatigue. I like the fact that you have to present a clean 40 cards, and there's none of this faffing around like you do get in CC, where you're like, well, how many cards have you presented? How many cards have I presented? Is he going to fatigue me? Everyone running exactly 40 cards feels great for the light version of the game. It's just removing one layer of complexity. Now, I will say, when you introduce sideboards, it can be more difficult for new players to figure out the exact round number of cards they should play. So it is a bit easier in some cases to say 41, 42, 43 is fine, because then the new player doesn't have to think, well, I've got, these 4 cards, are they going in, or which ones am I cutting to take them out, But equally, that being said, for a new player, if this is confusing you, just bring 40 cards. Right, just bring 40 cards in your equipment. Don't worry about sideboarding until you've got a better grasp of the game. Just bring a 40 card list you're really happy with, and don't get confused by what should I take out, what shouldn't I take out. Or just ask for advice. The majority of these Blitz formats happen in casual environments where I can say to my opponent, or say to people around me, what do I put in my deck against this hero, or those kind of things. Now, maybe not every opponent's going to ask if you're at a skirmish, but if you're at your weekly armory and you're sitting there with your sideboard and you're going into, say, a Rhinar, I would have no problem turning to my Rhinar opponent and saying, hey, listen, I know I've got these sideboard cards in because I net deck this new deck. Which of these 4 cards do you think are going to work best against you? And which 4 cards do you think need to come out? And ask them to tell me why. Like, if I'm at a weekly armory, I'm playing at that level of casual. As a more experienced player, I show up expecting to teach. Even if I sit down against an opponent and I teach them how to beat me better, I don't care. So if you're in this casual environment and you bring your sideboard because you copied a deck off the internet or something like that, just ask people, what should I put against you? Get rid of the confusion. Or just play the 40 card main deck that people usually put online. That's usually the most tuned version. You'll lose certain matchups where you're playing for those sideboard cards, but that's fine. You're learning and you'll have time to learn. The third point, of course, Drone of Brutality is banned. Where they unbanned Drone of Brutality, I was very shocked, so I'm equally not shocked to see it banned again. The card, for those of you who aren't familiar, is very simple. It's from the original set, WTR, where it was a rare. It is a 2/6 in red attack with 2 block, and it says a very simple line, which is, if Drone of Brutality will be put into a graveyard from anywhere, instead put it on the bottom of the deck. This card was originally banned because they didn't like the free infinite recursion that it enabled. It enabled fatigue strategies who would always have an attack to play, and they felt like that was just not particularly healthy in the game, especially in the context of heroes like Oldhim, who were really good with blocking and stacking cards together. Giving them an extra tool that's like a 6 power attack that keeps cycling itself was deemed to be a bit unhealthy for the game. And then they took the interesting step, which was that they banned the card, but then also because they banned it fairly early on in the machinations of the game. They also removed it from subsequent print runs of WTR and History Pack 1. So there are less of these out in the world than you would expect based on the size that the game has grown to now, which is one of the reasons I was against people unbanning it. The first reason was, hey, I don't think this card is healthy for the game. I don't like the free infinite recursion, especially when we've got classes like Illusionist who care a lot about 6 power poppers and running their opponent out of 6 power poppers. It really hurt Prism and Dromai in Blitz. And then, of course, you have the fact that Brute also cares about 6 power attacks. So if you can just keep cycling more 6 powers back into the deck, it's got a bit of an unhealthy interaction with Brute as well. So I wasn't really enthusiastic about this banning, but I'm kind of keen on the way that this has been resolved, right? They unbanned the card with a note that said, we know not all of you are going to agree. We're curious what happens. If it's not working, we'll ban it again. And then they've gone out, they've listened to player feedback on Twitter. I got a survey, I don't know, other people probably got a survey in their email saying, hey, what did you think about Skirmish Season 7? And then they took that feedback and said, even if it's not broken in terms of power level, because we've got Insomnia and Amnesia and Erase Face and Command and Conquer and all these other 2-for-6s that are just better, even if it's been power creeped, maybe it's still not fun. Maybe we still get rid of it, right? So that kind of logic really appeals to me. And I just like the fact they've been so reactive. They've unbanned it to see what happens. One skirmish season goes past, they say, actually, no, and they take it away again. And that's fine. Like, it's not skirmish season, and even like casual CC series and events are places where I'm happy for them to try and say, what if we unban that now? Like, if it gets unbanned just before a Pro Tour, that's a much bigger, much more weighted decision. But unbanning something for one skirmish season shouldn't actually be something that they put huge amounts of pressure on, right? If they think that it's time and internal testing kind of says that it's okay, unban it, see how it works out for one skirmish season. And if it doesn't and it's not fun, get rid of it. And okay, someone who lost the Genesis to a Drone of Brutality Fatigue Ira deck is going to be a bit sad, but in the grand scheme of things, taking those chances enriches the game because it gives players back cards, assuming they're still available, which Drone isn't. So let's just read through the rest of this so we get a bit more of their logic and we can analyze that. Expanded inventories are here to stay. Awesome. The crux of the Skirmish Season 7 Blitz experiment was that the 52 cards in your deck list could now be any combination of deck cards and arena cards, so long as you could present a 40-card minimum deck when it was time to sit down and play. From the moment of the announcement, community response to the expanded inventories has been overwhelmingly positive. Almost every poll we ran on the topic, both formal and informal, showed a huge preference for Skirmish Season 7 Blitz rules over the old way of doing things. We're inclined to agree. Now, I would agree with that completely. I saw general feedback on Twitter and on Facebook and Discord. The general feedback from people was, I like the fact that I can now tech for decks and have a bit of sideboard so I don't feel so blown out of the water in certain matchups, and I have a bit more control in certain matchups. They also liked the fact that it wasn't a huge sideboard, so they couldn't prepare for everything, but they just had a few cards that they could sideboard in. I will say, some people disagreed with this logic, and they said, I'm actually quite liked the process in Blitz of tuning a 40-card list to get you percents in as many matchups as possible. And by that I mean, because you have to tune for every matchup, you have to make decisions like, I know there's going to be a lot of Kano, but I still need to run defense reactions for Bravo and Dorinthia, so I'm going to include these 2 defense reactions in, knowing that they're going to be dead in Kano, but they're still valuable in enough matchups that it makes worthwhile. And some people did feedback saying, actually, I quite enjoyed that process, which you've taken away from a bit, because now I can sideboard down my defense reactions versus Kano and put in Oasis Respite or something else. So I do get that logic, but I think in favor of having better pairings and better experience in-game in every matchup where you can choose to get those extra decision points by switching in extra cards, I think that is actually a benefit overall, not just for player experience because they have less games where they get blown out of the water because they can't tech for the deck enough, but also in terms of keeping Blitz competitively relevant. And I know some people still think it's not competitively relevant, and I am on the fence on that line, but It does work to an extent to keep Blitz more competitively relevant because you can have a little sideboard that targets your weakest matchups and shores them up, or makes your mid-ground matchups much stronger and you still lose those weak matchups. One of the biggest points of friction around immediate implementation of these new rules was a concern that certain archetypes would benefit disproportionately, while some archetypes, brackets, okay, mostly Kano, would find themselves unable to compete when facing a greater prevalence of targeted hate. Reviewing the results of Skirmish Season 7, we are happy to report these concerns were unfounded. At the time of writing, a staggering 13 different heroes have picked up double-digit Living Legend points during the current season. No easy task with skirmish events only doling out 1 point per win these days. Leading the charge were 4 heroes that arguably occupy different points in the gameplay spectrum, with Kano carrying the torch for combo, Chain handling aggression, Ira firmly in control, and Kasai blurring the lines between all three. Close behind were Dash and Bravo, again representing 2 very different modes of playing Flesh and Blood, and I want to skirmish on Briar, so those Living Legend points unfortunately don't go to her CC, or she would be gone, but they do add up as well into her corner for Blitz. A wide open metagame in which almost any hero can succeed was exactly what we'd hoped to see under the rules changes, and players absolutely delivered. We can't wait to see how things continue to evolve with the rules changes permanently implemented, and players all in on deck building for the new terms of engagement. So I will say that this is good feedback, and I completely agree with their conclusion that Blitz at the moment is very, very wide open in terms of a field. And I guess I'm interested because if you watched my Birmingham Calling review, you'll see one of the things I saw when I was playing in side events, especially looking around because I had the time at the Battle Hardened, was the top tables had a load of different decks in. And I would really have loved if they had done a comparison here between the Blitz meta at the Battle Hardened, say, Calling, which was our last competitive meta of Season 6, and the changes that led to people winning at the skirmish, because I think that would have been a really interesting point of data for LSS to bring into this article, right? Because we can see then that at the Battle Hardened, let me see if I can dig this up. Let's be a good reporter. Thankfully, we have really good content creators here in the UK. Shout out to Baz the Bard, who does his meta report on UK events whenever they are on, and of course Trip from Push the Point is out there. And also this is sponsored by Silver Palms, so we give a shout out to them. Really great UK-based singles seller. I have had the pleasure of selling and buying cards from them. They give you good deals. They have very good customer service. And they're also really friendly. And they have stands at a lot of major events. So, you know, Silver Palms, really good. Living Realms also sponsors this video. Great shop up in, is it Castleford? It's near Leeds. And they also ran the Calling and run nationals for us as well. So they're quite good as a shop too. Let's just move my camera a little bit and let's talk about the meta. So we can see here that actually Chain, Kasai, Kano, right, all at the top of this meta. And how does that compare to what they said here? Kano, Chain, Kasai. Okay, so we saw Ira rising up a bit. There were 7 of her there, and I think Ira did win actually, in spite, actually, of the changes. So this is interesting because Ira won the Calling without actually any of the changes from Season 7 being in there, just with the Drone of Brutality coming back in. And that's probably what led to Drone of Brutality getting banned again, because she was winning with Drone of Brutality without actually any of the Skirmish Rule 7 changes. But we do see that from that field, this really big field, but there are, you know, double the Chain players compared to the number of Dash players. So we do have to take that a bit into consideration, that we then go into a top 8 that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different heroes in. And then we go into a Blitz where 13 different heroes have won over 10 Blitz events. So I think we can use a bit of deduction there to say that actually LSS is probably completely correct on this, that the changes have enabled some decks that were previously underperforming to break through in a really positive and good way. I personally celebrate these changes to Skirmish Season 7. As far as I'm aware, they are the first changes to the Skirmish, to any format we've had outside of some rules tweaks or some like changing of terminology, I think these are the first changes we've had to an actual format of the game, right? A main format of the game. So like CC or Blitz, not like tweaks for UPF and things like that. I think these are the first actual changes we've had to the rules of the game in that context. So I think that's actually very, very interesting to see. Very, very interesting to see how Flesh and Blood and LSS approaches changes to those kind of rules, because these are the sort of things that could turn a lot of people off Blitz. An added layer of complexity, an extra milestone that you have to meet in terms of learning how to play a deck. The fact that they approach it with consultation, a test series, and then surveys, listening to feedback before making a decision, that's a huge thumbs up in terms of community and player engagement, one that I love to see. Onto the 40 card limit. Marking a deviation from the rules of Skirmish 7, where you could put any number of cards into your deck as long as they were within the 52 card limit, we will be returning to a fixed size of 40 cards for games of Blitz. While uncapped deck sizes did not lead to an outsized amount of success for fatigue strategies, the current terms of engagement for the format mostly dictate that pure control strategies must devote a large portion of their inventory slots to arcane barrier equipment. If there were to change in future metagames, there is some potential for defensive strategies to benefit from larger deck sizes. So what they're saying is that currently if you're building a control deck of those 52 cards, 8 of those cards are probably going to be your main equipment set, and at least 3, maybe 4 of those cards are dealt to dealing with Arcane Barrier. That means that practically your deck size is only actually going to be 43, maybe 44 cards. Probably 43, assuming you need 1 weapon, maybe 42 cards. And that means you're not actually getting up to the sorts of levels where fatigue causes problems. Whereas, if we get to a point where arcane damage is less relevant, say Kano gets Living Legend in Blitz to join Icelander, and Briar gets Living Legend as well, then we're in a situation where choosing not to run Arcane Barrier becomes a much more valid decision, especially if you've got cards like Oasis Respite, for example. In that context, a control player could have their 4 pieces of equipment and their weapon, and then 47 other cards that they could put against every opponent. Now, if I'm running a clean 40-card aggro deck and my opponent is on a 40-card control blocking deck, I am likely to get fatigued every single time. So that's just worth bearing in mind. So the reason they're doing this is that in the future, when the arcane threat isn't there, because maybe Kano gets his Living Legend status, this could be a problem. And they don't want to change the rules again down the line, so they want to make it clean. We initially avoided putting a cap on a deck size for 2 reasons. First, we wanted to give players room to use variable deck sizing as part of their strategic arsenal. I like the flexibility, and again, as I've said, for new players it can be easy to not stress too much and just chuck down 41, 42 cards instead of having to find an exact 40. I do this in draft all the time, unfortunately, especially MTG draft where you can splash a lot. I'll just be like, it's 41 cards, it's fine. Which you should not do in Magic the Gathering. In Fab, it's debatable, but in Magic you shouldn't. While this arguably worked, the impact was fairly small and contributed little towards overall format enjoyment. The second reason was simplification of pre-game procedure and reducing opportunities for an inexperienced player to make an honest mistake that would run them afoul of the rules. In retrospect, we were probably a bit overcautious here. Game administration proved to be reasonably simple, and the community picked up the rules with no trouble at all. So, what we're kind of saying there is that they avoided putting deck size on because they were worried that new players would accidentally put too many cards in and basically get themselves DQ'd by presenting 41 cards, right? And I'm saying there are problems with putting deck size on for new players as well, so it kind of makes sense to leave them off for both reasons. But what they found through their experience was that people didn't really have a problem and they can put however many cards they needed to put in. So I think that's a good thing. I think new players can just learn to present 40 cards, and we have the usual problems you have where you just have to count correctly. And then Brian says, in my own skirmish games, I tapped into a bit of etiquette I remember from my days traveling the world and playing against some old school Japanese pros and other TCGs. After choosing the cards going in my presented deck, I would then fan out the face-down cards I was choosing to leave in my inventory. This allowed my opponent to know exactly how many cards I was presenting and alleviate any uncertainty. I intend to carry this approach forward in future Blitz games and fan out the 6 or 7 cards, depending on the number of presented equipment, that won't be making it into my deck, so my opponent knows I presented exactly 40. It's a great fit with the honest and well-mannered play that Flesh and Blood strives for in all events. Now this is interesting because, as far as I understand the rules currently, you are under no obligation to tell your opponent how many cards you've presented until they have also presented decks. So deck presentation is simultaneous, as far as I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, because this could be a big point. So if I turn around and my opponent says how many cards you're presenting and I say 65, and they go and grab another 5 cards, that's actually against the rules of the game. We both have to present simultaneously. And that's a lot of the reason why people obfuscate how much equipment they're presenting by just putting it face down in a pile, and various other things that happen just to stop people knowing how many cards exactly we're presenting. But I do agree that when there's exactly 40 cards, it's a good idea to just be upfront and be transparent to make sure you've presented the right number of cards, right? It's very, very easy to count, how much equipment you've got on the board and the number of cards left in your box, and you should only have cards relevant to your deck in your box at proper tournaments, and say, okay, well, there's 11 cards here, therefore there are 40 cards. No, there's 12 cards here, therefore there are 40 cards in my deck. Perfect. Moving on then to Drone of Brutality. So Brian says, to understand why Drone of Brutality is returning to the banned list, we need to understand why it was allowed back in the format in the first place. We said the following back in May when announcing Drone's unbanning. We are sure that many players will be celebrating the departure of Oldhim and Icelander from Blitz, with both of these heroes attaining living legend status with this announcement. However, Oldhim and Icelander were the premier decks for slowing down the Blitz format, and we believe that in their absence there is a good chance the format speeds up considerably. Returning Drone to the format is a nod to what hopefully becomes a new iteration of mid-range and control decks by incentivizing longer game strategies that leverage the Drone inevitability package. We'll be keeping a close eye on the impact of Drone of Brutality and preface this unbanning with a cautionary message that Drone has the potential to return to the ban list again. Until then, we look forward to seeing an old favourite being played again and again and again, and that was what happened. I mean, when Drone was legal, Ira just blocked as much as physically possible and then ended the game by cycling Give and Takes and Drone of Brutalities. And if you're not sure how that works, well, the Drone goes back into your deck automatically, and then the Give and Take, they have to block because they're on low life, and then Give and Take lets you put another Give and Take back on top of your deck. And that means that the next turn, you're drawing a Give and Take, which they have to block, a Drone of Brutality, which will cycle itself, and a blue that you can pitch to play both of those cards. And if your opponent is on is on 1 life, they basically have to block Give and Take every single time. And then you basically end up in a loop where you can always pressure them for 9, which is likely to be taking a lot of cards out of their deck, and really creates kind of, I would say, I get what he's saying. He's saying that we want control decks to have the aggressive tools to push forwards even while blocking, right? Because one of the big worries about a control deck in if you're attempting to fatigue or slow the game down is sometimes you just have to send your entire hand at your opponent, and that's 1/10 of your deck. So if you do that 5 or 6 times, you actually end up with only a 1/4 of your deck left, which you then have to continue blocking with, but also kill your opponent with, and that is a potential problem. Having something like Drone did alleviate that problem, because you would always have a 2 for 6 red attack that you could always play without losing those cards from your deck. So I mean, once you get down to the end of your deck, you can still be cycling a blue while blocking and coming in for 6, and that gives you a fatigue strategy, right? But I would say that it wasn't actually that fun, and ultimately I don't really believe in the same way they do, despite having played fatigue deck lists, in the fact that fatigue should inevitably win. I think fatigue wins when you run your opponent out of red attacks and then you pick a pivot turn to start attacking them again. I think that's when fatigue is at its best, is when you block their power turns and they're red, they're good reds, and then you pick a pivot point where you turn around and start smacking them. Fatigue for me becomes less fun when it's when it's Oldhim style of I have 8 cards left in my deck, you have 4, now I can just attack you with my hammer 4 times, and because we're both now on low life, you're going to have to block with those 4 cards, and I'm eventually going to win, so you may as well, just rush through the rest of the game, right? I feel like that's not as fun as being able to pick that pivot point, being able to turn the game, like very late game, like very control, still fatigue because you're really getting rid of their threats by blocking and defending efficiently, but not like grinding down to the wire in the way that Drone does. Anyway, let's keep reading and finish off this article. Drone very much achieved what it set out to do, and granted strength to heroes like Ira, Yoji, and Riptide that seemed to struggle in a fast-paced, mostly ice-less metagame. It even did so in a reasonably balanced way. While heroes playing Drone found success, they did not compromise an oversized portion of the metagame. However, the gameplay experience created by Drone still carried its share of problems. The repetitive endgame, the prisoner's dilemma type scenario it presents for control decks that may not want to play Drone. Drone is just a card that highlights the best of flesh. It just isn't a card that highlights the best of Flesh and Blood, which is why they banned it originally, because they said it was against how they wanted Flesh and Blood to feel. What he's talking about in terms of Prisoner's Dilemma is that as a control player, I may not like Drone, right? And I've given my thoughts on it. But if my control opponent is playing Drone, I have to play Drone as well, because otherwise I just 100% lose that matchup, right? So if he's playing Drone and I'm not, he has a late game, I don't, and he will eventually win. So if I was playing Ultim in this meta, I would have to play Drone to beat Ira. I couldn't just not play Drone, right? So that's kind of the prisoner's dilemma he's talking about, is that you're hurting yourself to hurt your opponent. There's more philosophy there, but let's not get into it. Even if Drone is an effective tool for slowing down a format, that doesn't mean it's the best or only way to achieve such a goal. 100%. There are loads of other ways in the game to slow down the format, and I look for, you know, what they're going to do in the future that isn't going back to Drone, because I don't think Drone will ever be the answer again. I think we've kind of seen that, but I could be wrong. Expanded inventories, on the other hand, create a level of agency and control in deck building that embodies exactly the type of freedom and flexibility we want our players to have. While deck building slots in Blitz remain extremely limited, there is just enough space for some prime defensive options to find their way into decks and bring the format to a more acceptable pace. Alternatively, decks that want to play fast have the ability to bring down their own counters to the table and look to punish heroes trying to turtle up. That's things like Poison the Well, Burdens of the Past, all those kind of things. Skirmish results point to a fact that all points along the aggro control spectrum can operate under these new rules, as a tremendous percentage of the available hero pool were able to procure living legend points over the course of a season. The balance between the metagame poles of aggression and control feel much less volatile when it is relying on thoughtful deck building decisions rather than the blunt instrument that is Drone of Brutality. 100%. For this reason, we are happy to put Drone back on the shelf once more and look forward to seeing control decks find and embrace more diverse endgame strategies. While we have decided to return Drone to the ban list prior to the next scheduled ban and suspended announcement, this should in no way be interpreted as an emergency banning. It is simply consolidating two separate but interconnected pieces of Blitz format housekeeping into a single announcement, with the upside that it makes the Blitz format more enjoyable sooner and sets the stage for an upcoming battle hardened in Las Vegas, Florence, and Portland to be run using the best iteration of the Blitz format has to offer. And it's important to understand, like, I am someone in the past who has called for emergency bans in this game. I called for emergency bans of Stubby Hammerer after seeing what Fi could do, and we saw that in the background LSS had known Stubby Hammerer was bad, but wanted to give people one tournament where it was legal before they turned around and said, okay, you've seen it now, you see why we have to ban it, goodbye. And I kind of agree with a little bit of that logic, but basically what it comes down to is I am for emergency bans, and I will call for them and acknowledge them, and, you know, when I say, hey, it needs to be banned today and tomorrow, etc., looking at the results, I saw exactly the same thing LSS did. Drone of Brutality did not warrant an emergency ban. It was having an effect on the format. It was showing up in some decks. But like the results say, not every skirmish was being won by Drone of Brutality control decks. Plenty of them were being won by wizards, more aggressive decks, brutes, like loads of different types of heroes. And that meant that it doesn't need an emergency ban. That means that its percentage win rate drone in was not high enough to warrant or demand an emergency ban, right? So 100%, we don't view this as an emergency ban. We view this as Skirmish Season 7 was an experiment, and Drone was part of that experiment. In tidying up the results from Skirmish Season 7, it makes sense to put Drone back on the shelf. This is not an emergency ban. This is just a healthy decision to tidy up the game, and I really do just commend sending it back to where it came from. when you had the opportunity to, right? If they had put an article out this week saying, we believe we're still on the fence about Skirmish Season 7, but we 100% believe that drone needs to be banned before these upcoming Blitz events, otherwise they're going to be terrible, I wouldn't have understood that logic, right? Because I don't think it's warped the format that much this time round. In the original Skirmish Season, when Blitz was legal and you had Ira winning loads of games through fatigue, drone needed to be banned as soon as possible. But this time it wasn't an emergency ban. I completely agree with that. So finally then, we here at Legend Story Studios always wish to take a moment to thank our players for allowing us to experiment with the rules of Blitz during Skirmish Season 7. Your participation and feedback were critical in ushering us forward to an exciting new era of Blitz. We hope that you love the new Blitz format that you helped create, and we look forward to collaborating with you more times to create great games of Flesh and Blood. So, remember that I am the person, if you've never watched my channel before, I give honest feedback to gaming companies when they do things. If I think something's terrible, I'm going to say it because, well, people should say it, right? People should say, hey, that wasn't great, this isn't good, that could be better. Like, people should point out the weaknesses and mistakes that people make. This isn't one of them. This is 100% like 5 stars out of 5. They thought, hey, this could make the format better. They tried it, they took a load of feedback, and they said, hey, it makes the format better. What do? They just implement it. They have control over it. If it turns out that this was a mistake down the line, and it doesn't fit with their future design ethos, they can just change it again. Like, this is the sort of change that can be made and should be made to reflect how the game is actually played, because no matter how much you test a format, behind closed doors, alpha, beta, all those kind of things, it's not the same as the living, breathing game that gets into the hands of the players. And too many card game companies, they think, hey, we've made the best game possible. We've made this amazing game. It's big brain, it's intense, it has weird features, and it's kind of funky. And then they think, but could it be better? And they see ways that it could be better, but they don't actually have the courage to step up and say, actually, we're changing things. Now, this isn't a huge change, whereas if we look at other games like Legend of the Five Rings, the LCG, which I used to play, they came out, like, later on with a whole second format, and they were like, actually, if I was designing the game again, I would do it this way. And I had things in that game, like genuine design things in that game, that I wish they would have just deleted. Like, there was a weird dial that you had to reveal with your opponent at the start of the game, and whatever number you put on the dial, you got a small penalty, but you got to draw that many cards. So, as many card gamers would expect, you drew 5 cards every turn, because you and your opponent both just slammed 5 on the table. And if they didn't, and you drew 5 cards and they didn't, guess who won the game, right? So, you know, the point is that there are design decisions that companies hold back from making because they're worried about changing things that are working. But if you're going to make a change to a core feature of the game or a format of the game, this is 100% the template for how you should do it. You say you find a low pressure setting in store. Great, in store is fantastic. Something that's going to happen across the entire world, so everyone has a chance to experiment with it. You let people know that it's happening well in advance. You make sure some of the prizes for that season are random, so that not everyone feels shafted if they lose the last game. They can still win something. You run a series of surveys before and after about how people are feeling. You talk to people on Twitter. I saw multiple LSS devs reaching out to people on Twitter, you know, both Carol and Brian, saying, hey, what do you think? Just tweet at me. And you know what? There are lots of people who play Flesh and Blood on Twitter. That was a very long thread with lots of people giving very concrete feedback. I also have it imagining that those people are also reading the Discords. They're also on Facebook and on Reddit, checking what people are saying. And they sent out a survey saying, please give us your feedback. And then once they've gathered all that, they turn around and they make a decision that's better for the health of the game. So this really is the template for making changes to formats moving forward. And other card games should look at this and say, ooh, actually, I've been considering this might be a better way to change a core fundamental part of my game. Let's test it with the players in a low-stress format and see whether it is actually better, or is it just better in-house because we played this game too much. That's all I really have to say about that. I think this is fantastic. I'm happy to see Drone gone again. I'm happy to see a positive change to Blitz. I do understand the people who preferred when it was just strict 40 cards, but personally, I feel like I've had enough matchups where I would like just 1 or 2 cards different to give me a bit more flex into my worst games, that I think this makes Blitz better, and it reinforces the fact that Blitz, to me, let's be honest, we'll leave with this cut, right, for those of you who are still listening. For a long time, I thought that Blitz was a terrible format, right? especially, because I cast Crawling Krakow, right? People remember that. Very different time in the game, casting Krakow, the calling, especially you look at the things that have happened with the recent calling in the UK and how diverse that format was, and it was classic constructed. But casting Calling Krakow was not as enjoyable as an experience as it could be, right? LSS were fine. We got plenty of support. They gave us some guidelines. They were still working out their full guidelines, but they gave us guidelines for things to say, how to treat things. We had a really good audio-visual guy backstage. There was some communication problems because we didn't know that we needed to be there on Friday. We were told we could come on the day of the tournament, and then they were like, well, can we do B-roll on Friday? And we were like, well, my flight comes in on Friday at 9 p.m, so if you had said, I would have booked a different flight. But my point is, all of those things paled in comparison to the real problem with the Calling Krakow, which was the Blitz format was not fun at that point in time, because Viserai and Skeleta and Sonata Arcanix were all legal. Now, let's just run through these for people who aren't familiar with what that was. So firstly, Viserai is not legal in Blitz, for very good reason, though people will be looking at CC and being like, surely this guy can't be that overpowered. I mean, look at what Lexi can do, right? As a reminder of Viserai's ability, when you play a Runeblade card, if you have played another non-attack action card this turn, create a Rune Chant token. Rune Chant is when you play an attack action or attack with a weapon, you destroy the Rune Chant and you generate 1 arcane damage to target opposing hero, and it's not a conditional effect. It's not an optional effect, so when you attack and you meet the criteria, you have to trigger your Rune Chants. Then we have Bloodsheath Skeleta, also banned, right, in all formats. There's a 2-block equipment from Crucible of War, the third set of Flesh and Blood, that says instant, destroy Bloodsheath Skeleta. The next attack action and non-attack action card you play this turn gain. This card costs 1 less to play for each Rune Chant card you control. Then we have Sonata Arcanix. The cost is X and X. Reveal the top X plus 3 cards of your deck for each non-attack action card revealed this way. Put an attack action card revealed this way into your hand. Then deal arcane damage to target hero equals the number of cards put into your hand this way. Shuffle your deck, banish Sonata Arcanix. As you can imagine, Viserai is very, very good at generating Rune Chants. You might play a turn that says, I play Mordred Tide. Mordred Tide says, whenever you make a Rune Chant this turn, make a second Rune Chant. That includes from Viserai's ability. Then you play Become the Arc Knight. You discard an attack action to search your deck for a non-attack action, go and get Sonata Arcanix. You make 1 Rune Chant, 2 Rune Chants from playing Sonata Arcanix. You now have 2 Rune Chants. Then you destroy your Vexing Quill hand, which is a glove that when you destroy it, you get 2 Rune Chants, you get 3 Rune Chants. Then you play Moravian Skies, right? Get a Rune Chant, you get 2 Rune Chants from Viserai. Now you've generated 7 Rune Chants this turn by playing 3 cards, right? Then you play then you crack your Bloodsheath Skeleta, and you play Sonata Arcanix, making its cost -7. That means that you reveal the top 3 plus 3 cards of your deck with 1 resource left over. Okay? From those 3 cards, you're going to go and get, possibly, because it's 6, you can possibly get 3 attack actions, right? And you've probably played a Moravian Sky, so one of them has go again. You've also generated, because you generate 2 from Sonata Arcanix, 9 Rune Chants. You then proceed to attack upwards of 3 times for 3 or 4 damage, plus the 9 Rune Chants, and essentially come in for lethal on the second turn of the game. Now, lots of people figured this out before the calling in Krakow. And I'm giving this example because this was Blitz at its lowest for me, right? If this is Blitz at its highest, for very good reasons, diverse format, games on over in a heartbeat. That was Blitz at its lowest. Games were incredibly high variance. Games were over in a heartbeat. Games rarely made it past turn 2 or 3. And if one of the Viserai players drew well, they would just blow the other opponent out of the water, because you just couldn't keep up with the amount of arcane damage and physical damage coming at you, fueled by this crazy, crazy combo, right? Because also, this reduced the cost of the non-attack action as well. So you could play some huge non-attack action that costs 3, give it go again somehow, and suddenly you're coming in for, 6 plus 9. Your opponent's basically dead before you even get out the gate, right? So I had a front row seat to that, and I say this because, you know, this is part of an interesting retrospective, and I always like to put these sorts of things at the end of my videos because I know only the real fans are still listening, and very few of you are, and that's fine. Is that imagine casting a calling where that is the case, right? Where the games are taking 5 minutes. So you come in, you line up, you vamp for 5 minutes, you talk about the standings, but it's hard to do because the standings are all Viserai versus Viserai, or Viserai versus someone else who then gets defeated by a Viserai. And you end up in a situation where, you know, you're actually talking for 5 minutes, the games take 5 minutes, you have a 5-minute player interview where they all talk about how their Viserai deck is good. Though we eventually we started just going further and further down the rankings, bringing up games that weren't, you know, winning in games, but were different heroes just for a bit of variety, because we knew that for the top 8 we'd be casting Viserai. And I mean, if we just bring up that numbers and crystallize that in fashion, right? The only real decks that were targeting Viserai properly were Oldhim, Icelander, and Kano. Icelander hadn't really been fully explored at this point. Viserai was 32% of the day 1 meta, it was 50% of the day 2 meta, and then you look at the top cut, we have Viserai mirrors, we have Viserai mirrors, Kano knocks out an Oldhim, and then both of the wizards get beaten by Viserai into an all Viserai final, right? So, and this is Yuanji, you know, wonderful person who won that tournament, right? And it was a great event. But actually, we had Stavro also kicking. There were some balance problems at that stage of the game, right? Because we had Stavro kicking around in CC as well. You know, and they've learned a lot since then. And this is one of those things that reflects how much they've learned since then, in terms of how balanced Blitz is now versus how balanced it was. I mean, this was 2022, how balanced it was over a year ago. So, you know, they've learned so much in the past year, and it's kind of fantastic to see how balanced and Blitz has come, because this was Blitz at its lowest, much like arguably Stavro meta was CC at its lowest. Maybe, I think so. One deck just dominating the format in a very non, you know, NPE kind of way. This is a beautiful top 8. I am behind this screen somewhere, doing something else, but that's neither here nor there. So, you know, Blitz has come such a long way, and it's really good to see. Like, if you had asked me, if we're being honest, if you had asked me before this if I would cast another Blitz calling, I probably would have said no, unless there were 2 tables on the go. If there were 2 tables on the go with staggered starts, I would have 100% done it. But if you'd asked me to cast another single table Blitz calling, you know, even 6 months ago, I probably would have said no. I mean, okay, let's be honest. I would have said yes because, you know, I know I had my channel break and things like that, but I have still been keen to do more casting, you know, despite the fact that, well, you know, despite the fact that I haven't necessarily had the opportunities. The UK has a quite a competitive content creator meta, and the Push the Point guys work so hard for the accolades they well and truly deserve. So I haven't really had the opportunity within my home market. I have cast, I cast Nationals in either Singapore or Hong Kong last year. But, you know, I would happily cast another calling. And I think while I would have had serious considerations about casting another Blitz calling in the past, after seeing Skirmish Season 7 evolve, and as a caster having the ability to talk about sideboard choices and things that people are putting into their decks to gain points in certain matchups, as well as, you know, the potential for having games that are actually reaching turn 6, 7, 8, actually having a bit of depth, I would definitely cast a Blitz calling again, in a sense that I wouldn't have cast it before. So there you have it, really. This is a snapshot of what Blitz looked like at its lowest. It was 2-turn games with, you know, one hero dominating the format and just deleting other heroes from the meta, and even the ones that did counter it, you know, got knocked out in good order. Now, this Kano, if I remember correctly, did almost win this game. So, you know, the Wizards were doing work, and Iceland also wasn't really well solved. So maybe a bit down the line, this wouldn't have been such a problem. But I think anytime you've got X costs and you've got unlimited reduction on 2 cards, that's a problem. You know, this could give you up to -8 on 2 cards. That's insane. So that's worth bearing in mind. Blitz at its worst is a format where one hero manages to dominate 50% of the day 2 metagame at a calling. And here we are, August 2023, And you know what? It's just not that anymore. It's not that anymore. If we go back to the meta report, this is day one. This is a field full of different heroes. There's no 50%. There's no 30%. You've got Chain. He's very popular. People were loving playing their shadow cards again. But guess what? There's a ton of other heroes there, and they're all viable. And then if we get into the top 8, you see then even more variation. Ira wins the event. 2 Reinars, 2 Kanos, Kasai, Briar, even a Phi. Like, the format is fun, and it is wide open. And I firmly believe, and in fact, I agree with what LSS said in the article, and I think we've gone from a format where this is true, where 4 heroes dominate the format, and we've gone from a format where this is true, where 1 hero just comes in and says, hey, this format's mine, to a format where 13 heroes are winning Living Legend points. And isn't that fantastic for the game? And isn't that fantastic for new players coming into the game where Blitz is their first format? Isn't that just brilliant? We've come such a long way since the initial foundations of this game. We've come a really long way from, we'll be honest, the negative experience I had at the Call in Krakow. Casting was great. Kugane was great. The format wasn't good. The format wasn't fun to cast. And the fact is, we spent more time trying to vamp and trying to make the game enjoyable to watch for people than we did casting some of the games, because they just happened that quickly. To a format where I have played Blitz and gone down to the last 10 cards of my game, not even playing against a control deck, playing against another aggro deck on my Briar list and just choosing to block smartly, set up a good turn, and pick my points. I have gone down to 10 cards. I have gone down to turn 12, I think. And I have had some of the best games of Flesh and Blood I've played playing the Blitz format. And you know what? That is everything I want for this game. And to be honest, Blitz is the gateway for new players. That is everything I want for Blitz as well. And that is something to be commended. The LSS design team and these changes are just a firmer reinforcement that they take Blitz seriously and they want Blitz to be fun, and they're invested in making Blitz fun, which is fantastic. If you've made it to 51 minutes in this video, thank you. You are fantastic. I'm probably going to clip the second half of this video into a second video, just talking about the growth of the game from the Calling in Krakow over a year and what difference a year makes, as well as some good Living Legends. But I think if you've listened this far, thanks a lot. And if you have listened this far and some of these things have resonated with you and you still haven't subscribed, then I wouldn't be a content creator if I didn't ask you to do that. So thanks a lot and have a good week.